will get started right now, and if anyone is coming in, we'll just let them in. Very cool. So with that being said, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the High School Entrepreneurship Workshop, Session 2. This event is hosted by the Clueless Robotics team and We Impact is a nonprofit organization that offers STEM educational events empowering students like you to make a positive impact on your communities. My name is Emily. I am a senior and a co-founder of We Impact, and I'm excited to be your host today. In today's event, we will get to hear from 3 amazing high school students who have started successful nonprofits and real revenue generating startups. They'll talk through their ventures, experiences, successes, and learnings. Before we begin, we have just a few reminders. First of all, we want this to be as immersive of an experience as possible, so we would love to have your video on. This event will be recorded and put on our YouTube channel. So if you don't want your name or face to be put on YouTube, that's also okay. Just turn off your video and change your Zoom name. Secondly, if you have a question about the content, please feel free to drop it into the chat box. We'll address it, and we will also have the Q&A session at the end of this event. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our 3 young entrepreneurs. First of all, we have Michael Zhang. Michael is a junior at the Bishop School. He is the founder of Print for the Cure, an organization and platform he initiated in response to the pandemic that has united nearly 100 makers in donating over 25,000 units of PPE. He is a co-founder of Boxhobby, a startup providing new ways to try hobbies for senior citizens, and a program director at We Impact. Michael first dove into entrepreneurship to use his passion for robotics and technology to make an impact on the world. Next, we have Ellen. Ellen is an aspiring machine learning engineer and entrepreneur exploring the intersection between tech and business. Through her role as global director at Elevate the Future, Ellen hopes to give back to the community through social entrepreneurship. She is passionate about business and marketing and develops her skills through internships at various organizations, volunteering, and competing in the DECA Entrepreneurship Series. Last year at LaunchX, she worked on a communication startup budget. Technology and business aside, you can find Ellen dancing on the national level, writing, and traveling the world. And last but definitely not least, we have Chloe. Chloe's main interests are in consumer startups, content writing, and growth marketing. She has founded Munch, a revenue-generating startup that has partnered with 25 restaurants to enable teens to order food more conveniently by text. Her team was also lucky enough to be interviewed by Y Combinator, the incubator that grew Airbnb, DoorDash, and Reddit. She is also the founder of The Lemonade Stand, an invite-only newsletter for teen entrepreneurs, and the president at Gatsby Clubs, where she implements an entrepreneurship program at 20 schools. So with that being said, I'll hand it over to Michael.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael, and I am a junior at the Bishop School. I'm also the founder of Print for the Cure, as Emily said, a PPE donating platform that has enabled nearly 100 makers to donate 25,000 plus units of PPE during the pandemic to over 1,000 organizations around the nation. I'm also the co-founder of Boxhobby, a startup that provides a monthly subscription, making it easy for seniors to try new hobbies. I'm also a program director at We Impact, the STEM and robotics education nonprofit running this event. So today I'll tell the story of how I got into entrepreneurship, beginning with my passion for technology, moving into some of the ventures that I've worked on. Well, I've always had a passion for technology. In 8th, 9th grade, I worked on a lot of 3D printed projects like this RC car you can see. And I even self-taught myself CAD and designed this 1/10 scale RC trophy truck. And eventually I also built my own racing drone. And around the same time, I began learning Python and Java. And so when I was younger, most of my life was defined by making these different sorts of projects. And along with these personal projects, I've also been doing FIRST Robotics for 7 years now. So I'm the captain of my First Tech Challenge, which also is the former San Diego champions, Arizona champs, and also ranked 2nd in California and 24th in the world at the end of last season. And what that means for me is that I'm really familiar with engineering, whether that mean CAD, 3D printing, machining, and also just prototyping and programming in general. And First Tech Challenge is also a really high dedication sport. It involves a really strong get it done spirit, since competitions are essentially hard deadlines and you have to get a really complex machine working in time for competitions. And finally, as a captain on a team, I learned a lot about leadership and effectiveness. And so I was managing a master schedule, constantly brainstorming ways to improve effectiveness of the team, whether that means switching fabrication methods or switching to a more effective communication platform or improving communication between mechanical and software divisions. And of course, with the pandemic, there was a lot of change and reaction that had to happen there too. And WeImpact was really when I began using my STEM and robotics expertise to begin creating an impact on other people. And really, that's the core of entrepreneurship. That is using your skills to create an impact. At WeImpact, I organized several events, volunteered, and more. And I guess one of the main parts of organizing an event is, of course, R&D, or developing content and curriculum that is interesting, useful, and inspires others. In addition, you need to get volunteers or speakers to help at these events. And of course, running an event involves a lot of management and making sure that everything runs smoothly. And once you have all the content developed, at WeImpact, we have to market these events, sending messages, posts, and contacting other teams to either help organize the event or to come listen. And one of our best events at WeImpact is actually a summer camp for First Lego League Robotics. And this is really, it is basically a paid product, as we help middle school and elementary schoolers learn about First Lego League Robotics. And every year before the summer, we develop curriculum and content, figure out what we're going to do every day of the camp. And then we find volunteers among our own robotics team and often from other robotics teams. And then we begin marketing the event to a younger audience. And every year we're able to get about 20 students to come learn about First Lego League. And we've actually been pretty successful in that a lot of the Southern California champion teams in the past 2 or 3 years have actually stemmed from our camp. And while I've always been a maker and a builder, and a lot of my previous projects include making an RC car or an RC trophy truck or drone, which are not particularly useful things, eventually I began thinking of ideas for a science fair project. And this involved ideation and paying attention to real world problems and things that I faced every day, and trying to think of potential solutions to innovate on these problems. And that's when I came up with the idea of these AR glasses. And so the problem that I noticed was that hearing impaired people, or people who are deaf, have trouble having conversations because they can't hear the other person speaking very well. And so the idea, the innovation, and the solution I came up with was a pair of augmented reality glasses that would perform live transcription of speech. So a hearing impaired person could wear them, see what the other person was saying, and be able to see the other person at the same time. And so with this AR glass project, that was when I first really began thinking about innovative ideas and trying to make something that would solve a real world problem. And of course, earlier this year, the pandemic happened. And I had already been 3D printing a lot of PPE with my school and then with my robotics team. But through that process, I noticed a big problem. My robotics team overall had donated about 3,000 face shields, but that is a lot of 3D printing, a lot of making shipping labels, finding hospitals who need PPE, and a lot of shipping. And that's just a lot of labor that causes you to burn out really quickly. And that's when I had an idea. So I realized that 3D printing and donating PPE was too difficult for the average person because of shipping and trying to find essential workers who needed PPE. And so the goal of Print for the Cure was to develop a platform that gave easy access to essential workers who needed PPE and easy access to resources to learn how to 3D print and learn how to ship and deliver. And so the main value proposition that we provided, or the main value that we provided to 3D printers to use our platform was that we gave them easy access to requests and we gave them information. And I would say the first big part of Print for the Cure that I learned was the just do it spirit. When I actually began building the platform, I had about 6 months experience with web design, and I had never launched a website or anything before that. And so the first thing I did was find a business partner who could help me with the web design aspect. And in about 2.5 weeks, we went from absolutely nothing to launching a minimum viable product. which is essentially the bare bones website that had all the minimum things to function. And once we actually launched that website as soon as possible, the next step was marketing. And of course, at this time, neither of us were really entrepreneurs and we didn't really know what we were doing. So mostly we just contacted personal connections who were essential workers and might have needed PPE. We emailed hospitals and businesses who were essential workers at the time. And eventually we tried using Instagram ads, and we realized that Instagram ads were particularly efficient in terms of reaching out to essential workers who needed PPE. Although, of course, it's important to keep in mind, Print for the Cure is giving free PPE during a pandemic. So marketing was also likely easier than normal. And on the other side of Print for the Cure, Print for the Cure actually serves two parties, essentially. Firstly, those who need PPE, and then those who 3D print PPE. And so we had to look for makers and 3D printers who would be willing to 3D print and supply the PPE. And so we looked a lot in 3D printing forums and other robotics teams, as many robotics teams have 3D printers or may even have already been 3D printing PPE, and also cold calling random makers and posting on different subreddits. And we were able to find some success there also. And throughout the process, there were many successes and many learnings. One of the successes were that we jumped in really early and developed an innovative solution that solved a real problem. And so we were able to create a big impact with our successful R&D efforts in building something that really solved a problem. And everything was executed pretty well, and we were able to make a tremendous impact. And as we mentioned earlier, we were able to donate over 25,000 units of PPE, whether that be face shields or door openers or ear savers. Although, of course, there were a lot of learnings too. The greatest challenge with Print for the Cure was finding makers to help supply the PPE. And of course, I've mentioned earlier, our value proposition to makers is that we make it easier to find requesters who needed PPE and then resources to begin printing and shipping. And this turns out not to be enough to motivate makers. And so something we should have done a lot more of was talking to actual makers who use the platform and learning what sort of thing they would have liked to see. And some examples of what some other similar groups did was create a Slack channel among makers to give more of a community feel that motivates makers to use a platform, or sending things like filament discounts or printer discounts. And another thing that I learned is that starting a company often involves a lot of boring labor. Even though the vision for Print for the Cure was to enable hundreds of other makers to begin 3D printing PPE, at the start, you have 0 makers on the platform. And so I personally have donated definitely hundreds or thousands of pieces of PPE myself. And 3D printing 24/7 and packaging and shipping is not necessarily the most fun thing. And so certain business models will just require a lot of labor in the beginning to get it up and running. And that's something that you just have to accept if that's your business model. And this is also a couple of photos of what Print for the Cure has been doing. And that at the bottom right is also a map of, at one point, of all the requests that were on the platform.
So we have a quick question in the chat just about the robotics team. Thank you for your question, Chrissy. Just to quickly answer it, how did we get our team set up? We set up our team around 6 years ago, and we were just friends who loved robotics. So if you have more questions about setting up a robotics team, feel free to stick around at the end and we'll answer those questions too.
So we've talked a little bit about LaunchX the first session also, but if you don't know, it's a pretty competitive summer program that is 4 weeks long and virtual. They essentially put you on a team of 4 high schoolers and you try to build a startup within the duration of the program. You attend classes, work with instructors, and receive feedback from mock advisory boards. And so LaunchX was really my first professional entrepreneurship training. And I would say what defined my LaunchX experience was going out of my comfort zone. LaunchX has produced a few, quote, successful businesses in the past. My goal was to be one of those. And since it was virtual, a lot of things were in Eastern time. And so there was a lot of waking up at 5 a.m. every day to go to electives, finding people to interview for market research, or asking my classmates for their grandma's phone numbers because our business dealt a lot with senior citizens. And of course, there was just a lot of working with customers, and generally that was not what I was comfortable with at the time. And so while LaunchX is no guarantee of building a successful business, I do also recommend the program. And if you're interested in applying, feel free to screenshot and email me or just message me in the chat. Now, what did I actually build at LaunchX? Of course, we mentioned earlier, I am a co-founder of Boxabi. And so the problem that Boxabi was trying to solve is that senior citizens often want to try new hobbies, but doing so is often tedious and expensive, causing seniors to give up. Choosing the right hobby and finding materials and learning how all require effort, and often seniors would rather just stick with common or less healthy hobbies. And so that was a problem that our startup was trying to solve. And the solution that we came up with was a monthly subscription service that delivers all the materials and instructions necessary to begin trying a new hobby. And this monthly subscription would come every month. And also a big part of our business model was that hobby materials would be supplied by partners or other existing hobby companies. In addition, we'd also have a gifting option in case, since this would be a pretty meaningful gift, somebody could give to a senior citizen or family member, and all the hobbies would be tailored to the specific preferences of that person. And our main value proposition for customers was that you could try a new healthy hobby with almost no effort, and you get a unique, customized, and meaningful gift if you are gifting it. And of course, there were successes and learnings. Successes include having a really innovative idea. We did a lot of pitches and we got a lot of positive feedback on the fact that our idea did solve a real problem. We also did really rigorous market research. We interviewed over 50 senior citizens, and throughout the course of those interviews, we learned a lot about what senior citizens really wanted in the product and how we could shape a product to their needs. And then through those interviews, we also got a lot of interested customers who wanted to stay posted. Although there were a lot of learnings with Boxabi also. The main thing I learned was how important a team is. Of course, when you're working on a hobby company for senior citizens, it's pretty not relatable for a high schooler. And so some of our team members lost interest when school began and lost commitment. And that was probably the biggest, biggest failure for Boxabi. And I think really it's important to find at least 2 members in a team who can stay really committed and be really passionate about the product. And the second thing that I learned is that you have to work on an idea that you really love. Again, our idea is not very relatable. And so that will really hinder your motivation to work on it. And then finally, it is smarter to build a website or a software because you don't have to manufacture anything. And generally, when you're building a startup as a high schooler, if you're manufacturing something, you're probably going to just be doing that in your garage by yourself. And oftentimes that can also be another demotivator. So while it's certainly possible to develop something physical, oftentimes a website or a software is also easier to build. So those were my learnings. Thank you for listening. And I think we'll move on to our next speaker, Ellen.
All right, so I'll start sharing my screen right now. Can you guys all see this?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So hi guys, I'm Ellen, and today I'll be going over my journey in entrepreneurship, some learnings and takeaways that I've gone throughout the process as well. So first of all, I wanted to start off with a quote to introduce my talk. And it's, not every student will become an entrepreneur, but they will all someday need to think like one. So obviously not everyone is going to become an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurship is a very hard area to get into. But I think the idea of entrepreneurship, creating something that's very high impact and very fast paced and growing really fast, that's something that is really important. And I think anyone can learn a lot from the idea and mindset of entrepreneurship, even if they don't want to be like one. So I hope this presentation will give some insight into that and hopefully some key takeaways. Also, a quick disclaimer, I'm still growing and learning in this field as well, but hopefully as a high schooler, my experiences will be somewhat relatable to you guys and also provide a way for high school students like yourself, if you do want to get into this, some ways that you can start making it. Emily gave a really excellent introduction, but just for a little bit more background about me, like Emily said, I'm really interested in both aspects of technology and business. So some things about the tech side of me, I really love medical imaging, communications, and just overall technology for social good. So below are a few things about a few more accomplishments that I've achieved. Also, as part of business, I'm really interested in entrepreneurship and also a bit of marketing and graphic design. And in my free time, you can probably find me doing photography, writing, and fencing. And I also really love talking to people. So I'm also a host for a podcast called Elevate the Future podcast. And I just talked to cool people on there, and you can check it out at this link. So during this presentation, I'll be mainly talking about three things. DECA, which is how I actually got started in entrepreneurship. Also LaunchX, which Michael touched upon as that summer program. And also my role in Elevate the Future, which is an international nonprofit. All right, so the first thing is DECA. I know this was covered in the previous talks as well, so I'll kind of go a little bit more fast into this. And DECA is basically the way that I got into entrepreneurship and kind of learned about it. I didn't really know at first that high schoolers could actually participate in entrepreneurship, but I learned through DECA that about the basics of entrepreneurship, about business and marketing as well, and also some of the more basic parts of business, such as how to write a business plan, how to pitch an idea, which is really important for communication or if you want to pitch to investors, and also some basic business fundamentals. So if you're looking to get kind of a start into business, DECA might be a good event for you. So a few things about DECA. The basic gist of DECA is just an event to prepare emerging leaders, entrepreneurs in a variety of business subjects. And the main events here are written, role play, and an online stock and virtual business challenge. So for me, the most valuable part that I got out of DECA was basically how to pitch an idea. So in case you guys haven't really heard about how DECA events are like, it's basically when you get a 10-minute prep period and then you pitch for 10 minutes. So you basically, in my series that I participated in, which is the entrepreneurship series, they basically give you a prompt or like a business that is targeted towards a certain market. And you basically come up with a business idea or how to scale this business model. And the main things I learned about this through pitching, basically pitching on the spot, right? So we would only have 10 minutes to come up with the whole thing, and we'd have to give a pitch right after to someone who's actually very experienced in business and who's actually had experience in the like entrepreneurship themselves. So the main tips that I have for pitching, this could be useful whether you're pitching an idea to an investor or if you're just pitching yourself for an intern or something like that. Pitching is something that's a very, very useful skill. And the main things I learned out of this was that, first of all, highlight a unique value proposition. So why you and not someone else, or why your business idea and not any other business out there, right? So why are you any different? And this could be something like you're targeting a market that has never been accessed before, or your idea is just really unique and all of that. Another thing that you should do, this is just a general pitching or speaking guideline. You should have a clear flow throughout your pitch and also signpost. So for example, one thing you can do is there are three main highlights of my proposal or business idea. This is X, Y, Z. And basically the thing you want to achieve out of this is that when you're pitching a business idea, investors or someone who's listening to you isn't going to remember every single thing. So you really want to tell them what they should remember for the pitch and what they should take away after you're done as well. And finally, this is just a quick tip. This is also taught in LaunchX during our pitching practices. But one thing is to always end with a call to action or a follow-up. For example, after this, thank you so much for meeting. I'll call you in 2 weeks to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss further details about the company. And this is a really great way to ensure that they are still interested after, or just a call to action for them to contact you. One final tip is to be confident when you're speaking, because if you're confident, then people are more likely to believe you, and you just seem like a better, it just elevates your whole pitching experience as well. All right, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is LaunchX. And like Michael mentioned, this is basically a summer program for young entrepreneurs. During the course of LaunchX, I started Budget, Skip the Chit Chat, which is basically a communication startup to bridge high school students and have meaningful conversations. And through this, the main things I learned were about ideation. So how do you get to the idea in the first place? Some basic parts of entrepreneurship and some general steps that you might take to start. So about Budget, which is the startup that I launched, the problem that we're really trying to solve is the lack of deep connections among teenagers, especially with quarantine and social distancing measures in place. So actually, this wasn't our original idea or the original problem that we were even trying to solve. Initially going in, we had an idea to combat mental health by bridging school counselors and high schoolers, but there are many problems about the idea that I'm not really going to go into. But the main thing that I also learned from this is that it's really good to pivot. So when you find that your initial idea isn't good, a part of entrepreneurship is knowing when you should switch that idea and when to continue. So eventually we got into this idea, and the value proposition of our company was that we would provide a platform to connect high schoolers, and this would be based on personality and interests, and also simplify the process of setting up a virtual call to meet new friends and engage in meaningful and memorable conversations. So I think the main thing about this was that our company basically tried to bridge gaps in high schoolers because we saw that especially during COVID-19 and quarantine, there was a lot of loneliness. And we interviewed many high school students as part of market research. So I know that Michael talked about this as well. Market research is really important to get to know your customer. And one thing that we found out is that high schools generally during quarantine, they weren't talking to their friends as much. They're feeling more loneliness, and that could lead to worsened mental health. So our platform is really trying to bridge that gap and really set up these conversations so that students could continue to talk to others despite being in a virtual setting. My main takeaways that I got of LaunchX was, first of all, not to jump to the solution. So I know that personally for me, I have a lot of really good ideas and solutions, but it's actually really bad to start from the solution and work your way to the problem and really try to find a market for that solution. What you should be doing is going the other way around. So instead of going from solution to problem, you'd go from the problem to solution. Basically, this just means that you would do market research first and keep your options open. And then once you understand your customer and their pains and their needs, you can then come up with an idea that suits your customers, not the other way around. Because no matter how good your idea is, if you don't really have a customer or no one's really willing to buy or pay money for your service, then your good idea isn't really going to go anywhere. So this kind of leads into my second point that I learned. This is the main thing that LaunchX actually reiterated in the course, and this is to know your customer. So a big part of that is obviously market research and understanding who your customer is and really putting yourself in the shoes of the customer. Because you want to know what your target market or your customer would buy, and that's really what you're going to shape your product from. So another part of that is also the MVP or the minimal viable product. You always want to test it with your customer because they're ultimately the person that you're trying to fit the product for product market fit. And also, team is very important. When you're starting a startup, the main people who are going to be supporting you and going to be working with you is your founding team. And a lot of startups fail for this reason. Because when you're working with a team, everyone has to have the same goals aligned, have the same commitment, or really all be on the same page, right? So usually when you're starting a startup, you'd want to find people who you know you can trust, or if you're more technology or business oriented, someone who can fulfill the other half of the picture, right? So if you're more focused in technology, it can be a business co-founder. Another thing that you can do to get started on this right now, just to keep your options open, and in the future, if you do want to seek out a co-founder or a founding team, is to just build your network and connections and really improve your team collaboration skills. So if you, I'll be talking about this later as well, but if you talk to more people and get to know, I guess, more people on the internet or outside of your range, a lot of those could potentially be your next co-founder or someone that you could reach out to if you do want to go and start a startup. All right, so the next leg of my journey is elevate the future. And as Emily mentioned in the self-introduction, I'm really into social entrepreneurship. And so social entrepreneurship is basically entrepreneurship for a social cause or to create a social impact. And that was basically my role at Elevate the Future. So Elevate the Future is essentially an international educational nonprofit to increase access to business and computer science education. And through this, I really was able to grow my leadership skills. So how to manage a team, how to really found a chapter and then scale up from that and manage hundreds of volunteers. Also, outreach and marketing, right? Because you have to have people actually come and attend your events, how to build a brand community around that, and also growth in organizations and management overall. So what Elevate the Future is all about is basically providing business and computer science education. Because a lot of schools, especially in other areas around the world, there isn't really business and computer science being taught, especially in high schools and middle schools. So that's what we really discovered was a really big need that we wanted to fulfill. And you guys might know a lot more educational nonprofits. And the reason why we stood out and why we are able to have a space in that market, I guess, is because of our unique value proposition, right? So there's three things I've listed on here that is really what makes Elevate the Future unique. And the first one is creating a real impact, right? So students really want to create, build, and make a mark and really know that they're making an impact in their communities. And for example, one project that we're working on as part of Elevate the Future is called Project Falcon. So a lot of educational nonprofits might be teaching these, for example, teaching students how to code, teaching students how to build a website. But what we're really doing is we would actually go after each class and we'd connect the students with the businesses for Project Falcon. So students who are interested, they could help build businesses for Project Falcon. And these would mainly be high school students. And they know that they'd actually be creating an impact with these websites, because not only do we teach them web development skills, they could then in turn do that with their and build a project for an actual business struggling during COVID. The next thing is a tight-knit community. So building a community around your business or your brand. So every chapter was basically able to have their own built-up communities, and students would actually be able to go into these communities and make friends, meet new people, and really enjoy being a part of the process and being a part of the nonprofit events overall. Another thing is the learning by application. So many of these nonprofits, like I mentioned, they just teach, but they don't really have the do part. So actually getting hands-on and building websites, and students actually building real things. So those are the main things that I think is really special about Elevate the Future, that really makes Elevate the Future stand out from other nonprofits. All right, so how my journey through Elevate the Future, I actually started off as a chapter founder. So I founded Elevate the Future San Diego, which many of you guys may have heard of. And then I moved on into being a global ambassador and basically helping other chapters around the world, such as in Ghana, in Vietnam, and in Pakistan, really create an impact in their communities. And right now I serve as the global director of Elevate the Future. So really spearheading these new events and initiatives and managing a organization of over 400 volunteers. So some main things that I've learned from this that I think not only applies to nonprofit work or social impact, but also applies to companies in general, is first of all, to over deliver. So I learned this through LaunchX2. It's really important that you don't under deliver, because then the customer is not really going to be happy. But one example of this is when I was planning for our web development class for Elevate the Future San Diego. And initially our plan was just to teach students how to build websites and have them actually build websites during the course. But then afterwards, I realized after seeing these websites that we should actually further pay for their websites. So not only did we promise on teaching these students web development, having them create a website, but we also over delivered in the fact that we actually paid for some domains of these websites and bought them their custom domain for a year. So another thing that I also did was I personally got on calls with students outside the class and retaught lessons to them. So the main thing to gather from this is that when you're making a business promise or when you're providing something of value to a customer, a good thing to do is to sometimes over deliver and never under deliver. Another thing is that usually quality is greater than quantity. So customers usually remember when they have a good time, whether it's like going to Disneyland, their company's providing you with a good time. And if they remember that feeling or that happiness, I guess, when they went into your company, then they're going to be a recurring customer. And that's something that's really important in business, having these customers that come back time and time again and who are loyal to your nonprofit or your company. Another thing that's great about recurring customers is that they really genuinely like your nonprofit, they can spread it to their other friends, which is another part of marketing, right? It's word of mouth. And these are all things that are really beneficial to a company, and that there comes value with quality rather than just sacrificing quality for a lot of quantity. Finally, something that I found was really important was to actually build a community. So brand community is something that a lot of you guys may be familiar with. For example, Starbucks is really good at this. If you think about it, if you went into a Starbucks and there's absolutely no one there, there's like no chatter, everything like that, the experience might be a lot worse for you, right? And the reason why Starbucks, one of the reasons why Starbucks is so successful is that they managed to build a community of coffee lovers. They have these forums or like these places where coffee lovers can come together. And when you go to Starbucks, you really feel like you're part of a really warm and like, I guess, productive environment. So that was one of the things I learned as well as part of Elevate the Future, to build a community and a place where people can come and really enjoy and get to know new people. So another thing that is really important in business and entrepreneurship is marketing. And I learned a lot about this through my role in Elevate the Future as well. So some tips and bits for marketing, first of all, is to establish a very clear brand. So if people think about you, what are they going to remember you by? So for example, this can be colors, styles, graphic design, and core values. And they're basically things that people can correlate with you when they look at your Instagram or when they look at your social media. They'll see your logo and they'll just remember you. And that's one of the things you want to have your customers do. Just have you like remember you and be aware that of your presence online. Another thing, this kind of goes back into building a community, but there's two main types of marketing, I would say. So the first of all is more community-based. For example, if your parents are in a Facebook group or next door, right? You can send it into a community and market that way. There's also the other side of that, which is more viral marketing. For example, if you create a very viral TikTok video that's marketing for your event or marketing for your company, that could be another way you spread awareness about your brand. These two are very different. Personally, for Elevate the Future, I found that community-based marketing is better because if you send something that's in a community, then people are more likely to go because it's something that's more trustable, right? If you send like an event like a web development event, for example, if you send it someplace community-based, people are more likely to come because it seems like it's part of their community and it just draws them in because they think they're going to know people in the area. Versus viral marketing, this is good for some products that really want to grow super fast, but it's also really a good way to spread marketing, kind of depending on your company. Either one of these could be a good avenue. Another thing is to provide high value. So right now, as I'm trying to scale up a podcast, I'm really trying to think about what people want to hear, not just what I'm interested in talking about. Because this goes back to really providing value for your customer. You really have to put yourself in their shoes and see what they want to get from your company. Finally, just to end off this presentation, I'll just give some quick lessons I've learned through entrepreneurship. So the first one is to just reach out to people. Like Michael said, a lot of times in entrepreneurship, it's really breaking out of your comfort zone and pushing yourself to do something that you may not be currently comfortable with. So one thing that I've gained out of this is I realized that reaching out to people is very beneficial. Whether it's someone that spoke at LaunchX, like a speaker who founded their own company, I found really interesting. I would reach out to them and get on calls or just cold outreach to people I found really interesting and cool and learn from their experiences. Because people who have founded companies probably have some tips and tricks that they can give you over time. So if you talk to more people who have actually done it successfully, you can try to replicate that when starting up your own startup as well. Another thing is to read, because it's a really good way to absorb knowledge, especially there's a lot of entrepreneurship books out there. For example, The Lean Startup, 0 to 1. I could name a lot more, but you guys basically get the point, right? It's really good to read and absorb knowledge from other people's experiences, kind of like also talking to people as well. You can take parts of their experiences and their story and learn from that as well, so you don't make the same mistakes as them. Another thing is to invest in your own personal growth. So like I said, it's really important to really try to push your boundaries and make yourself uncomfortable. And this goes into part of having that entrepreneurship mindset and not being like over time, you get a little bit more used to failure and not that afraid to start a company because you get not as afraid of rejection or failure from that. And finally, my last piece of feedback is to just try out new things and explore. A good part of high school entrepreneurship is that you're still young and there's really not that much that you have depending on the success of your company. So you might feel like a little bit bummed out if your company doesn't succeed, but it's not like you're completely destroying your livelihood or your income really depends on your company. So I think that's one really good part of high school entrepreneurship is that you can try out new things and you can try starting a company. And if it fails, then you get the experience and learning experience with you, but there's not really any like devastating effect. All right, so that concludes our presentation. I hope that was helpful for you guys. And at the end, I believe we'll have a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to put that in the chat and I'd be happy to answer. So next up, we have Chloe.
All right, hi everyone. Let me just share my screen really quickly. Hi everyone, my name is Chloe. I'm currently a high school junior from Southern California, and I've been involved in startups since freshman year in high school. And along the way, I've definitely learned some things about high school entrepreneurship, but I've also picked up some major red flags in the entire way that high schoolers are currently being taught to create startups that I think are really unproductive in creating startups that are actually feasible for the long run and actually is like sustainable and scalable. So today I want to share with you my experience in running my startup Munch, some red flags in the whole high school entrepreneurship community, why they're red flags, and the most exciting part, what you can actually do yourself to create your own startup that is sustainable. Next slide, please. All right, so to start off with, this is a story about these two teenagers. One of them is 14 and the other is 15 at the time telling the story, but I think they're 17 right now. So back at that time, what they did was they created a Chrome extension that actually was able to find the contact information of any person using LinkedIn. So for example, you could go on somebody's LinkedIn profile, you would find their email and you can find their phone number, things like that. So it's helpful for contacting. And what they did was they actually cold called Sam Altman, who was the president at Y Combinator at the time. If you don't know what Y Combinator is or YC is, it's the incubator that led to the growth of startups like Airbnb, Reddit, Twitch, Instacart, Stripe, Dropbox, all these really big name startups. And it's essentially like a unicorn generating accelerator. And so these guys, normally you would probably email the director of admissions or like DM them on Twitter, but these guys just straight up cold called the president of Y Combinator, which is pretty gutsy of them. And what they did was they actually moved to San Francisco. They pitched to Sam Altman. Sam Altman was like, hey, I'll bring you out to Mountain View and Y Combinator's headquarters. Pitch to me, we'll see how it works. And they were actually the youngest founders ever to be accepted into Y Combinator's 2017 batch. So I wanted to share this story because I think it's a very scrappy story. It shows scrappy ways of teenagers to get to where they are today, which is really cool. Next slide, please. So as a quick introduction, hi, I'm Chloe. I run Munch, which is currently a startup that is ordering food all over by text for students. We applied to Y Combinator, my team and I. We applied a couple of weeks ago, actually, and we actually passed the interview stage. And in terms of interview stage, we were really ecstatic when we found out that we passed the interview stage. You can look up the statistics for it, but it's pretty hard apparently to get through that stage. So we were pretty surprised that the fact that they would let in high schoolers interview at YC. I also run Gatsby Clubs. Gatsby is a startup incubator. We're partnered with Stanford and Berkeley currently. We also worked with the assistant dean at Stanford's Graduate School of Education to create our curriculum. And so it's a really fun experience, and you guys can also apply to start your own chapter if you want to mentor startups. I also run the Lemonade Stand, which is a monthly newsletter that produces playbooks covering ideation, marketing, finance, investing, all these really in-depth topics. And it's written by entrepreneurs, students like you who have done it themselves. Next slide, please. All right, so to start with a story, in freshman year of high school, this is like probably the worst thing you can start off with if you want to get into like startups. I joined a ton of these high school business competitions, and I'll explain why they're bad later. But I essentially joined competitions like the Diamond Challenge and the Blue Ocean Challenge, right? And I created probably the worst idea to start off with in terms of startups when you're first starting out. I created Uber for Kids. There are two main reasons why this is a terrible idea. Number one, there's so much legal barrier to it because you have to make sure that the people driving the kids aren't psychos, right? You have to make sure they're background checked, all of that. And it was just not a very feasible thing. And I don't want to deal with like legal troubles in my first startup. The second thing is like you're dealing with kids, right? And kids, it's taking a very big capital. It's very capital intensive to create an app for like Uber for Kids that's kid friendly to use. And also it's very like tech heavy because you have to make sure the driving is like in real time. You can book drivers, all of that. And at the time, I had no idea how to code. So it was pretty unfeasible in terms of legal barriers and also coding, my bad coding background. And so what I did was I surveyed tons of customers, but that was it. I made no cent in revenue. I didn't even like create a landing page. It was pretty bad. And then I wrote so many business plans. I probably wrote like 3 to 4 business plans that were really in depth, each 5 to 10 pages long, grinding in Starbucks, like trying to create a bunch of business plans. But it was actually a really bad way to actually start out because business plans are 95% baseless claims that have no evidence attached to them. And it's actually really unproductive to start off with a business plan. Next slide, please. And so the reason why high school competitions are bad is because they prioritize a lot of things like business plans over impact. Again, a business plan is just literally your own hypotheses, just research online that's probably not even related to what you're doing, instead of actually going out there, talking to customers, building a website, trying to get traction, trying to get newsletter signups, trying to see how many people can actually see your product. That should be what you're doing when you're first starting out, not writing a business plan. And also, a lot of high school business competitions actually rarely have recurring revenue. A lot of high schoolers who actually win these competitions, they walk away with a check, but do they actually get recurring revenue? Probably not most of the time because it's very difficult to like have recurring revenue in the first place. Number 3, high school business competitions prioritize a lot of complex ideas over feasibility. So for example, if you want to create a startup idea like Uber for Kids, it's not great at all because it's very hard to get very far with that idea. Instead, you should just start off with an extremely simple idea, and I'll talk more about that later on in the presentation. And number 4, it's not really an actual startup, it's more of like a simulated startup. So you're not actually like talking to customers doing that thing. Next slide, please. So in sophomore year, that was when I really started to move away from the high school business competition thing because they were really unproductive for me. And I actually found about Gatsby, which was the high school business incubator that I entered on a Reddit post during class. So I was like, this sort of seems kind of skeptical. It's posted by a student, and most like high school nonprofits, it's like I thought it was founded by high schoolers, but it was actually founded by adults who were reputable entrepreneurs and founders themselves. So at the time, I was pretty skeptical of the entire thing. And I decided to like, what can I lose from it? I entered it with my friend. So then we started entering their competition. So in the first iteration, I created sending flash promotions for food. So for example, what you would do is you would sign up for a text messaging updates, and then we would text you literally flash promotions of food. The reason why this idea is bad is because even though it is feasible, because it's pretty easy to get text messaging going and it's not an actual app, it actually is very push heavy and not very pull heavy. And what I mean by that is you're not allowing the customers to interact with you. All I'm doing is sending out a bunch of text to people. Number one, people probably don't want to receive and being spammed with text. And number two, they might not receive relevant suggestions for restaurants they actually like. So the second iteration we finally moved to it was sending a word like boba, and then you would get a coupon. So you would text boba and you could get a coupon, a ding tea, share tea, or whatever. Next slide, please. So after we had the idea in junior year, that was when we really took off with finding a really good idea that would actually fit. So the third iteration was ordering food by text. So you could order a food by like texting a restaurant's word, and then after that you could say, okay, what would you like? I want boba with 50% sugar, all of that. And the reason why we created it is because even though there are apps like Grubhub and DoorDash, they're really intensive in terms of button clicking. I actually looked up on Grubhub and tried out ordering a boba myself, and it takes like 13 to 20 clicks just to order a simple boba drink. And I thought, Gen Z, us young students, we don't necessarily have the patience for that. We want things to be as frictionless as possible by sending a text message. And to me, I think that's the most frictionless process as possible, just sending a couple words and then being able to pick up your food 15 minutes later. And so what we did was we applied a Y Combinator and we got in for the interview. But one of the most crazy experiences I've had in the whole high school entrepreneurship thing is we actually changed our idea 18 hours before the interview. So we had our idea of the flash promotion thing, but we actually changed it to ordering food by text, literally 18 hours for the interview. So we had to scrap all of our answers for all of the pre-written questions that we thought they would ask and just redo all of it. So we pulled like all-nighters that night, just trying to figure out what we should say and just fixing up our answers. Next slide, please. So I want to go into you've heard my story now, but now I want to go into why should you create a startup as a teen? Number one, you literally have nothing to lose. You have no jobs, you have no commitments. And even though you are in school and you might be a bit busy with AP testing, IB classes, or studying for the SAT, the truth is that you're never going to be any freer than you are right now, even though that does sound kind of weird because I'm sure all of you guys are really busy with your own commitments, right? So you literally have nothing to lose. So get started right now because the earlier you start, the less commitments you have. But this is not your typical after-school activity. This is not something you treat doing 5-6 hours every single week. I'm sure you guys have sports or nonprofits that you're really committed to and you really want to have a great impact. You should spend the same amount of time as you do in those really intensive sports or activities as you should with the startup. Otherwise, the startup is rarely going to make any impact. Number two, people want to help you. I think people in a general tech and startup community are generally very helpful, but when you state that you're young in the first line of your email or in your subject line, they're automatically 50 to 60%, they're going to respond and they're going to help you out. So take advantage of the time when you are young. I know some of you guys put in the chat that you're in 5th grade, which is insane. Reach out to literally find the email of Amazon, like Jeff Bezos, and try it out. Send him a cold email. You never know where it could go. If you say you're in 5th grade, that's cool enough. So that'll get him reading the emails. And then number three, COVID-19 is literally a disguised blessing. If you want to create a startup right now because everything is remote. All the accelerators are remote, all the networking events are remote, and not only are they remote, they're free. So you can literally go to any of the demo days that are live streamed on YouTube, and it's no longer centralized in the Bay Area anymore. So take advantage of the time when it's all on Zoom. Next slide, please. So how you can start off with a super duper simple idea. So you should sell something for 1 to 2 months, like thrift clothes, drawings, photo presets, stickers, super simple things. And after that, write down observations like how to scale, how to grow your company, how you should sell, and how you should approach the customers. Create a landing page really quickly. Your idea should not take a lot of time at all. It should take you like less than 10 hours to execute. And then just try to make a goal of making $100 in profit. And that simple experience will be so much more impressive than creating a long business plan that's like 5-10 pages long. And it's just going to be much more impressive in terms of when you're presenting to investors like, hey, I made $1,000 selling photo presets. Like that's so much cooler than making a boring business plan. Next slide, please. So in terms of the organizations I'm involved in and how you yourself can get involved, I run Gatsby Clubs. It's a incubator. We're currently partnered with Stanford and Berkeley, and it's actually founded by David Yi. David Yi is one of my personal mentors. He's a super awesome guy. He raised $40 million for his AI tech startup, Rid Labs. And he actually started an SAT prep company. It's an SAT prep company, and that's the startup that he's currently running. So what you guys can do is if you want to mentor startups, create a team, and get involved in competitions, you can actually start a chapter, but the deadline is January 17th. So you can start at the link I put up there, the bit.ly link, in order to start a chapter and start mentoring startups. But the thing that's really different about Gatsby Clubs is we require you to have traction before entering the business competition. So that means you could raise revenue, you could have newsletter signups, you could have website views, all of those things count as traction. So that's something different that certainly sets us apart. Number two, we offer $25,000 in funding. So we offer you lots of capital if you want to create a more capital intensive business. And then number three, you can use our 10-week curriculum, which we partner with the assistant dean at Stanford's Graduate School of Education. Next slide, please. And these are some pictures from Gatsby Clubs. This was Gatsby students at Stanford. They were learning about design thinking. And then this is pitching. So they were involved in a lot of pitching events. This is Julia in the picture. She's a blonde haired girl. Now she's at Harvard. She was my mentor last year. And it was just a really great community to get involved in. So I totally encourage you guys to all join the Gatsby Clubs community and start a chapter. Next slide, please. All right, so lastly, for the Lemonade Stand, this is something I run, and it's a monthly newsletter that offers intensive playbooks covering ideation, marketing, finance, investing, pitching, finding a team, literally anything you can think about creating a startup. The reason why I created this is because there's not a lot of advice out there in terms of teams and creating startups, and all of this is purely actionable. Every single newsletter is packed with advice that you can take to create your own startup. And since y'all are here today at this workshop, I'm actually going to be offering a Fundline Pass. Traditionally, this newsletter is invite only, but since you guys are all here at this webinar, you guys can head over to this link here that I'm putting in the chat, and then you guys can request an invite, and then you guys will get your invite a couple hours later to start reading the newsletter. We also offer a Q&A service. You can send in your startup questions, and we'll actually be answering those questions in the next newsletters edition. And I think that is the last slide, but thank you all so for listening. Thank you all so much for listening to my talk. And now it's time for the Q&A.
All right, thank you, Michael, Ellen, and Chloe. We do have a Q&A. We're running a little bit late. If you need to go, that's totally okay. Thank you for coming, and please connect with us at www.weimpactcommunity.com if you would like to be a part of We Impact and receive notifications for more of these events. But if you want to stay for the Q&A, please go ahead, drop all of your questions into the chat. We will answer them. And while we are doing that, I have a couple questions for our awesome panelists here. So I have a question for Michael. Currently, Print for the Cure offers PPE for free. So do you think it's feasible to turn Print for the Cure into a revenue-generating business? And if so, what are the steps you're going to take to do that?
I think that's a really good question. And of course, the pandemic is not going to last forever. And so trying to donate PPE forever is also not practical. I think in terms of trying to generate revenue with Print for the Cure might not be the best way, since the people who are on Print for the Cure and the existing audience we have, both in terms of makers and requesters, like the people who are 3D printing PPE already are here to donate things, not really to get involved in something that's going to profit someone. And so that kind of just changes the whole spirit. But I think definitely a pivot is possibly in sight. Like instead of donating PPE, possibly we can begin donating 3D printed prosthetics or something like that. But that's something that definitely might be happening soon. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple questions for Ellen. Where can we view your podcast and where is the Discord server invite?
Yeah, so I'll actually send out the podcast link right in the chat. I actually just interviewed the #1 machine learning influencer on Twitter, so I'll be pushing that out soon. But here's the link for the podcast, and I'll send out the Discord invite.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. We have a question from Mia. Great question, Mia. In terms of websites, what would you recommend? I guess this one can go to anybody.
Is this about building a website? I think.
Where would be a great starting point? I mean, I know for We Impact, we use Wix. Super easy. Don't need to know any coding. You just fill it in. So Wix is always a good place to start. What did you use, Michael?
I think probably the best choice is just whatever you're able to get out there the fastest and will work for at least a little while. For Print for the Cure, part of the reason why, well, it's mostly custom using HTML, CSS, and Django. And part of the reason for that is because I am passionate about technology. And so that gave me a big motivator to develop the website if I made it custom. And also Print for the Cure had some unique functionalities like map that showed the requests or this emailing system and things like that. So those are some of the reasons that I went with a custom website. But I think if you're trying to sell something, there are a lot of platforms that make it a lot easier and faster, like Shopify, or I forgot the name, but there's also a less costly solution. But there are definitely ways to build websites much more easily and quickly. So I'd recommend probably just whatever enables you to start making sales as fast as possible.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the advice there. I have a question for Chloe. So we would love to hear more about Munch's business plan. So where does the revenue come from? Can you just tell us a bit more about your idea for Munch?
Yeah, so revenue in terms of we're actually pretty different. We have a two-sided marketplace. So we have the munchers who are the people texting us and then like ordering food via text. And then we have the restaurants who are like receiving those orders. So right now for munchers, we don't charge them. But for restaurants, we do charge them like a flat, pretty typical SaaS model fee. So we charge them $40 a month, but currently we're thinking about upping that to $70 a month.
Okay, great. So how do you convince people who haven't used it before to pay that rate upfront?
Yeah, so the great thing about texting is it's really easy to set up. So we're actually able to, if they like sign up on our website, for example, we're able to send them a demo and get them actually up and running with our system within 24 hours. So we do a lot of demos. So my co-founder and I, we literally drive to like restaurants in the city, spend an afternoon driving to them, and then we show it to them on the spot. And that way, because it's texting and we can show it to them on the spot, then we're convinced than having to see like an online way that you can't really interact with.
Awesome. I have a question for Ellen. So Elevate the Future has a huge global community. What are your tips for marketing? I know you have an awesome Twitter account, and what else do you do?
Yeah, so I think the main things for marketing, personally, when I've been marketing events for my own chapter, I found that for events such like this, where you have to go and attend a class, the community-based marketing is better. So stuff like sending it in Facebook or Nextdoor have been really, really effective. Also, yeah, like you mentioned, there is a global community, so also leveraging the other chapters was something that my nonprofit was able to have. But even if you don't have a global presence for your nonprofit, you can always reach out to people and see if they're willing to share it with your friends, or just send like emails to your personal connections and have them come. And also, this gets easier over time because when people start coming to your events, then there's also word of mouth because they can spread that to their friends and bring in like their friends to come to your events.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ellen. And we'll just take one more question and none of them come in. we have two questions. Perfect. One from Anthony is, how did you implement your startup into your schedule? This one can go to any of you three.
For me, I try to block out my day. So I block out days like the weekday, certainly for school. But before in sophomore year, when school is like a bit less crazy, I plan to get all my schoolwork done 10 p.m.-ish and then do startups for like another 2 hours or however long it takes me to finish that day's task. And then the weekend, I would like, that's when I really put a lot of time into startups. So I would spend like 6, 7 hours on Saturdays or Sundays working on it. And I think it just comes down to limiting yourself. So I have like screen time limits on Instagram and YouTube and Reddit and everything to make sure I don't go doom scrolling. But yeah, just blocking out your day and then putting screen time limits.
Great, thank you. And last question, if you have any more, feel free to stay behind. What's a good place to get a website designed for a charity nonprofit specifically? So maybe Ellen, you can speak to that.
Yeah, I don't think there's a specific template or anything that's specifically like tailored towards nonprofits. But if you want, there's a lot of bootstrap templates you could use. I'm sure Michael could speak more to this as well. But in general, for nonprofits, I think the main thing is to have a lot of pictures. It's not really a template, I'd say, but that's just a general tip when designing.
Okay, awesome. So that's all the questions we'll take for now. Thank you so much for coming to our event. Like I said before, if you want to get notifications for more events in the future, we have an artificial intelligence event coming up. You can put your email address into www.weimpactcommunity.com. If you would want to watch this event over again or share it with friends, you can go to our YouTube channel, which is We Impact. While there, you can hit the subscribe button, and you can see all of our events there. So with that being said, yes, those are their contact infos as well, if you want to reach out. If you have any more questions, stay behind. We'll keep the Zoom room open. Thank you for coming, and I hope you have a great day.